Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome back. We are here with our next session. We just had an excellent keynote from Juliet Brown of Motivations, and we are now here at our noon session, and I'm excited for this one. We're here with our speaker. Is it William or Will? Will?
I go by Will.
Okay, cool. I was gonna say there was the quotes in there as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Will Young, he's a CTO with Clearwater PD out of Florida, doing a session called Neurodiversity in 911, Embracing the Benefits of a Diverse Workforce in Emergency Communications. Take it away, my friend.
All right. Thank you, Ricardo. And thank you so much for putting this on and bringing this community together. And thank you for everything you do within the trenches. You've given me my favorite piece of dispatcher related trivia that I share, whether people want to hear it or not. And that was everybody's favorite Florida Sheriff Grady Judd started in dispatch. And so anytime he comes on TV, I always love sharing that. And I would have never known that if it weren't for the podcast. So thank you very much. Thank you for all you do for dispatchers and the community. And I really do appreciate you. So I'm Will Young. I am from Clearwater, Florida. And we're just going to dive right in. I'm talking about neurodiversity. And truthfully, when I started putting this together, I started talking to people. I was told to be careful because this is it is going to question some of the ways we've been doing things for a very long time in 911 and in dispatch and emergency communications. And I think that's a good thing. And I'll talk later about why. But before we do that, before we get into anything, I do need to let you know I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a lawyer, therapist, nurse practitioner, nothing like that. Anything here that I didn't attribute to somebody else is based solely on my professional experiences and personal experiences. Nothing I tell you here should be considered medical or legal advice. And of course, as boilerplate as it may sound, anything I share here is not reflective of my employer. Though I will tell you, I love my bosses and the city of Clearwater, and I'm grateful that they embrace a diverse and inclusive workforce, particularly in the state of Florida when it is not cool to embrace DEI. City of Clearwater is really on the edge when it comes to doing so. So nothing here is policy. Nothing you take away from this should violate any of your policies or procedures. However, if it causes you to think, well, our policy and procedure would never allow that, maybe it's time to start thinking about rewriting those policies and procedures. And that's the whole reason I'm here is 15-20% of the population in the United States of America identifies as neurodivergent. And we're going to talk about what some of those identities look like. But just like Juliet said, we are living in a time when we need to not be afraid to be who we are. I have always, my entire life, been a working professional and have been open about who I am. I was a teacher for 10 years. I taught in the classroom for 5 of those years, and then moved into administration, started working with students who were deaf and blind. But in my 5 years in the middle and high school classrooms, first day of school, the very first thing I did, I pulled out my driver's license, I passed it around the classroom. And I never allowed my students to call me Mr. Young. They always called me Mr. Will, and the Mr. was only because I had principals that insisted upon that salutation. I am and have been never afraid to be who I am. When I was first diagnosed as autistic, I was 22 years old. I remember being at a dinner and my mom shared with the people we were with. She said, well, we just found out Buddy's my family name. Buddy is, he's suffering from autism. And I said, okay, let me slow you down here. I don't suffer from anything. Now, if the world around me is suffering from my recent diagnosis of autistic, that is not a me thing. I am not suffering. So I've been in this industry now since 2021 with the city of Clearwater Police Department. Love where I work, love the people I work with. Like I said, former middle and high school teacher and administrator. I did work with juveniles and adults who were blind and or deaf or both, and did that for the last 4.5, 5 years of my career in education. And then, like everything in America, education became highly political, and Unfortunately, when you are a person who lives out loud and is yourself all the time, you don't necessarily always fit into certain molds. And like Doug said earlier, I am really good at getting myself in trouble. And so it was time for me to move on. And I did my own thing for a while. And then I'm a servant at heart. I love to serve people, the community. It's exhausting, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's what I don't feel fulfilled if I'm not serving. So I came back to public service as a dispatcher, call taker, and CGIS operator for the city of Clearwater Police Department. I love it. I am married. I am a cat dad. That part is very important. I have 4 cats. If they happen to walk across the screen while I'm presenting, I apologize in advance. I'm a stepfather, and I've been helping my sister raise my nieces for about the last 10 years as well. But then on top of all of that, and you know, the whole reason I'm here, I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which is no longer a recognized diagnosis. We're all just autistic. But I've always embraced Asperger. And I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome in 2008, 22 years old. I always knew something was different about me. I never had friends my age. I never had friends, really. I always hung out with the office people at my schools. I always wanted to sit next to the teacher. I just was never the same as everybody around me. And finally, in my 20s, my first job, I had good health care. And I was able to start working on who I was and figuring out who I was. And I did receive the diagnosis. Now, Asperger in multiple forms of autism are all just considered autism spectrum disorder. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit as well. So why am I here today to talk to public safety communication leaders, frontline staff about a topic related to inclusivity, to diversity, especially in a time where, honestly, diversity, inclusion, equity, they're under attack. No matter what you believe, no matter where you are, DEI is like it's one of the new 4-letter words. You know, we might as well add it to Carlin's list. How dare you say it out loud? And we're in an industry that is plagued by perpetual staffing crisis. But most importantly, every single person who is in the session today, you are working with someone who is masking their neurodivergent self every single shift. Every tour of duty, you are working with somebody who is neurodivergent. Whether you know it or not, whether they're as open as I am or not, whether you've suspected it and it probably is true, you are working with somebody who is neurodivergent. All right. And that's important to understand because communication centers, emergency communications, we are not immune to the necessity of inclusivity. We serve diverse and diverse communities, diverse constituents. We are not immune to the need and the necessity of diversity, of inclusivity, and of equitable practices. And the reality is the lack of inclusivity in our comm centers is what breeds the extremely toxic environments that almost every single person in this field loves to go on Facebook and complain about, but nobody wants to do anything about. And so that's why I have now sort of, after this summer, I attended APCO, I said, you know what, it's time for me to start talking about what I know. And Sam talked yesterday, take a bet on yourself. It's time for me to bet on myself. I know this. I know that neurodivergent people are capable of doing this work because I've been doing it. And I think it just means we need to start having conversations because our communities are diverse and we need to be representing our communities and our ECCs. And like I said, 911 is in a perpetual staffing crisis. And if we keep doing what we have always done, we will continue to be in a perpetual staffing crisis. We've got to look at our practices. We got to ensure they're inclusive and that we are not losing out on quality candidates simply because that candidate's brain may work a little different than what we have come to expect or what we have labeled as the norm in 911 emergency communications. So that's why I'm here today. I appreciate every single person that is in this presentation. This is my very first time presenting. I appreciate Ricardo taking a chance on me. I'll be done with this and I'm going to enjoy my McFlurry that I just bought, which, by the way, comes in a paper cup now, which is odd. But then I'll also be super exhausted for the day. And I just appreciate everybody taking their time to listen to this bald guy tell you about how our brains work and how we can do better in 911 when it comes to folks who have brains that may not work like everybody else's. So, what is neurodiversity? It's more than a buzzword. I talk to people all the time, and they're like, "Oh, that's just another typical mainstream media buzzword to try to get people to dive into, changing the established." Okay, what's wrong with changing the established? But it's more than a buzzword. The Oxford definition of neurodiversity is the range of differences in individual brain function rather, and the behavioral traits that are regarded as part of normal variation in the human population. Okay? So, in other words, people experience and interact with the world around them in a variety of ways. And there is no right way of thinking, learning, and behaving. Our neurodifferences are not, in fact, deficits or disabilities. We are all, if you want to get down to the bottom line, we are all neurodivergent. I said, what is neurotypical then? Well, the reality is I don't know. And frankly, I don't think there's a scientist, a doctor, therapist, anyone in the world who does really know. But what we do know is that most scientists and doctors describe neurotypical as a person who thinks and processes information in a way that is what is expected of the setting they're in or their culture. But I still subscribe to the fact that we're all neurodiverse, because brains are like fingerprints. None of them are exactly alike. And so, in my opinion, based on what I know about who I am and my neurodivergent peers and friends and studying I've done, and I do a lot of studying because that's what autistic people do. We just love to learn and then sound like arrogant and know it all to everybody around us. But I digress. There's no such thing as a normal brain. All right. But there are societal expectations as well as scientific and medical qualities that meet the definition of typically found in a human brain. And those brains that meet those definitions are what most are going to consider neurotypical. All right. But at the end of the day, again, we are all neurodiverse. None of our brains are doing the exact same thing. Some of us more than others. All right. I can't talk about neurodiversity without talking about masking. Okay. And that's a very important topic in the neurodivergent community, masking. It's just an important topic. And in the past, I've described it as another term that another community uses, and people haven't liked it. So rather than offend, I'll just say it's a very important topic in our community. It's called masking. And what masking is, the formal definition, it's the conscious or unconscious suppression of natural behaviors, expressions, or coping mechanisms by neurodivergent individuals so that they appear more neurotypical. And masking is a strategy that allows neurodiverse people to blend in, avoid stigma, manage workplace interactions. One study estimates that roughly 45% of neurodivergent professionals said that they would not be comfortable asking for the supports or adjustments they need at work, which implies that they're probably already or likely to mask. So if you're working with a person who's neurodivergent and you know they are, and you say, well, it doesn't seem to bother them, they're really good at masking, because neurodiverse individuals, we're really good actors. We can adapt to our surroundings. We're chameleons. All right, but it comes at a cost. And I told you when I'm done here, I'll just be laying out on my anti-gravity couch, relaxing for the rest of the day, because while it improves social acceptance, that's temporary. And it prevents us usually from asking for the things we need, reasonable accommodations, or really prevents us from having a simple understanding from those around us or people we work with. I love my partners, but I know when I have pissed off my partners, when I have gotten under their skin, I know what the common thing that is said about me when I'm not in the room. I know all of those things. And I try every day to mask them, but sometimes some days are better than others. Some days I'm more tired than other days. Some days it's exhausting. All right, masking is linked to higher rates of anxiety, depression, as well as other mental health disorders in neurodivergent folks. And it causes neurodivergent folks to burn out at a much more rapid pace than their neurotypical peers, which obviously in our ECC environments can be amplified. I come home from a 12-hour shift. We work 12-hour shifts. And again, love my job, love my community, love my partners, love my admin. I come home and my wife knows not to speak to me. The cats know to leave me alone. My stepson knows to leave me alone because I've just been on for 12 hours and I need time to come back from that. Or I will be so burnt out that I'll just want to curl up in the fetal position in my bed and not deal with anybody or anything for a long time. So masking is important to understand because even though you may be working with folks in your ECC who are identifying as neurodivergent, you may not know because they may be super good at masking. And masking is not being fake. It's not lying. Okay. It is a mechanism used to be able to fit in with what society has deemed normal. Some people have that desire more than others. Some environments require it more than others. All right. When I was a teacher, I taught middle school for a very specific reason. Middle school kids are absolutely crazy. All right. They don't know anything about who they are, what they want, or anything. All right. So for a person like me, fresh out of college, middle school was the ideal place to be because I fit in with them. Not that I was acting like a middle schooler. Of course not. I was their teacher. But I could be okay making missteps because just as goofy as I am becoming a working professional with autism, they're middle schoolers being goofy, trying to figure out who they are in this world. So, you know, this idea that we've got to fit certain things, I just think we're at a point where we've got to maybe move on from it. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about diagnoses you may encounter in your ECC because you can't change something if you don't understand it or have a bit of an understanding on it. So this is not an exhaustive list. I am not the world's premier expert on neurodiversity. So the things I describe here is not going to list every single person who may or may not have this diagnosis, official, unofficial, self-diagnosed, et cetera. And most neurodivergent diagnoses exist on a spectrum. And the varying degrees of where people land on that spectrum with their diagnosis is, of course, just as diverse as the entire diagnosis to begin with. So, and this is, again, just a few of the most common diagnoses. And the reality is science has not, science, medicine, they have not really come to terms with the idea of neurodivergence. It's a fairly new idea. It's a fairly new concept. There's a lot of argument, even within the neurodivergent community. I follow a ton of neurodivergent influencers and doctors and therapists and coaches on LinkedIn. And right now, two of the more prominent neurodiverse advocates in our community are having like this monumental war of words over this definition. And one of them posted this, and I thought I would share it here just so you have an idea of why the topic is as controversial or is as open and just hard to handle or fix as it is. All of these diagnoses have either been diagnosed as mental health disorders, brain disorders, in some cases, traumatic brain injuries or non-traumatic brain injuries or anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, your brain is functioning different. The neuro-ness in you is diverse. It's different. So I never want to offend anybody who may be here who identifies as neurodivergent, but you're not shared in this list. And so that's why I put this umbrella here. And of course, this umbrella is not exhaustive either. So just keep that in mind. Our brains are all different. All right, first one, my favorite, autism, ASD. You may hear it called Asperger's. There's a ton there were a ton of different diagnoses early on when psychology and psychiatry started diagnosing autism. But autism spectrum disorder is a broad range of conditions characterized by challenges in social skills, repetitive behaviors, speech, nonverbal communication. CDC estimates that autism affects roughly 1 in 36 children or 1 in 45 adults in the United States. My comm center, we have 40 people. We're fully staffed. Woot woot. We have 40 people. I'm the autistic one. But I also have 2, maybe 3 others. I have 2 that publicly have talked to me about their autism diagnosis, and one of them that I'm fairly certain is, but just doesn't like to talk about it. So again, I'm telling you, these folks, we are with you. We are your partners. We are there in the chair, under the headset. All right. 1 in 45 adults, that's a lot if you think about the size of ECCs in America. ASD, folks diagnosed with ASD typically have issues with social interactions, sharing our interests, our emotions, understanding the feelings of others, deciphering what others may be thinking or feeling based on body language or what is considered a social norm. My wife hates taking me places because I don't want to embarrass her, but you know, I am who I am, and I say things that I probably shouldn't say. Sometimes I say the quiet stuff out loud, and I don't say the stuff I should say out loud. So we don't necessarily identify what is normal. It just doesn't click the way it would for somebody else. A lot of folks on the autism spectrum struggle with eye contact, but trust me when I tell you, we are listening. Again, back to my classroom teacher days, one of the very first things after I, passed my driver's license around the classroom, I would tell my students, very often when I'm up here in the front of this classroom, my eyes are going to be closed when I am talking. And you're going to think it's weird, or I may be blinking a lot, and you're going to think that's weird. But trust me, if my eyes are closed, I am hearing you, but I need them to be closed in order to hear you, because everything else is just causing so much stimulation that I just can't focus on what's being said. And so trust me, if you have somebody in your life who is on the autism spectrum and they constantly have their eyes closed when they're interacting with you, they hear you. Also have trouble with relationships, expressing our feelings, making friends, and get extremely overwhelmed in social situations. I tell everybody, I love my wife with every fiber of my being, but I can't let her go because she's the first person who really, truly accepted and embraced autistic me. I went through a lot of relationships in my 20s and 30s, and people just don't get it. I am not a feelings person. I'm not a deliberate hurt your feelings person, but I am not a crier. I am not a get upsetter. I'm not. I never have been my entire life, which was growing up part of the reason why people thought something was wrong with me, because I would go to funerals for family members and I would just be completely blank. Was I sad? Absolutely. But there's no expression of emotion. I just don't get emotional. It's not that I don't have feelings, because every human on the earth has feelings. I just do not express them in a typical fashion. And the reality is, if you've met one person on the autism spectrum, you've met one person on the autism spectrum. All right. People I work with, not just in my current agency, but as a teacher, they always like to compare me to Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory. Because as my kids like to say, I know everything. Now, I always correct them and say, I don't know everything, but I do know a lot about a lot. But that character is one person on the autism spectrum, which was never actually publicly said. It was just inferred. And I am one person on the autism spectrum. We are one person. We're not all going to have the same traits and capabilities. And autism is going to look different for everybody, all right, depending on what your diagnosis is. The psychology breaks it down into 3 different levels, 1, 2, and 3, based on the level of support needed. These definitions I have on your screen are extremely concise down. Thank you, ChatGPT. Level 3 basically requires very substantial support. Level 2 requires substantial support. And level 1 requires support. Asperger's syndrome, what I was diagnosed with in my 20s, is considered a level 1 autism diagnosis. Some people may call it high functioning autism. That makes me cringe, because even people who are level 3, they function highly in another area of their life. They just may not function in the area that we want them to, or that people want them to. So those are the 3 levels of autism. Asperger's syndrome, I'm going to talk about it because I love it, because it's who I am. I've spent so many hours researching it, so many groups I've been a part of. It's not a standalone diagnosis anymore. You'll still hear people like me say we have Asperger syndrome, because that's what I identify as. And it's not because I think that the label of autistic is a negative label in any way. It's just who I am. It's who I'm proud to be. But anyone who received a diagnosis prior to 2013, when the DSM changed, they'll still usually refer to themselves as having Asperger's syndrome. It's just level 1 autism now. So it really is a matter of personal preference. Moving on, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. This is also another very common. It affects roughly 1 in 30 adults in the world. And it's characterized by an ongoing pattern of inattention or hyperactivity, impulsivity that interferes with functioning and development. And that definition is from NIMS, the National Institute for Mental Health studies. ADHD, folks who have ADHD, they may have difficulty staying on task, sustaining focus for long periods of time, staying organized, but it is not because they are defiant people, and it is not because they don't understand what they should be doing. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. They may also have hyperactivity. They may seem to never be able to sit still. They have to constantly be moving or stimulating themselves in some way, even in situations where it is not necessarily appropriate. A lot of folks with an ADHD diagnosis are impulsive. They do things without fully thinking them through, or how the decision is going to necessarily affect them. Some of them have difficulty maintaining self-control. And they sometimes like to desire to be rewarded immediately, or they have an inability to delay gratitude. My middle niece was recently diagnosed ADHD, and she wants things right away. And if she doesn't get them right away, she just can't handle it. And it causes her to go off. And as she says, the kids have this new favorite thing. She's going to, I can't even think of it right now, but, I'm about to crash out. If you don't do this right now, I'm going to crash out, which apparently means have a meltdown. Kids change vocabulary like dirty laundry. And a lot of times, folks with ADHD diagnosis, they don't consider the long-term consequences of their decisions. They may be fidgety. They may lose things easily. They may talk a lot. They are really good at interrupting conversation because a lot of times they can't wait their turn. ADHD is a very common diagnosis in adults these days. A lot more adults are receiving ADHD diagnoses because access to appropriate diagnostic tools and the ability to relay who people are to the diagnosticians is making it easy for ADHD to be diagnosed. It doesn't mean that medicine has just gone off the deep end and is throwing out labels on everybody. None of this means that. The reality is science, medicine, which is a form of science, it changes every single year, and things get better and better and better, and the ability to diagnose things gets better and better and better. All right. A lot of adults who have late in life neurodivergent diagnoses never talk about it with anybody because they've lived most of their life with it, and it's, they've figured out how to cope with it. And then you got people like me who won't shut up about it. And that's because I want to dispel this idea that this is just medicine, just science, doing some silly, crazy stuff, because it's not. It really isn't. I was autistic my whole life. All right. The traits that I received that diagnosis from when I was 22 years old, they didn't just show up in my 20s. They were always there. I grew up in a poor home. We didn't have access to incredible health care. My parents took care of me. We always got to go to the doctor, do our shots, whatever the case may be, but we just didn't have access. Mental health care was a luxury in the early 90s. It wasn't as accessible as it is now. I see my therapist, my psychiatrist on the same camera that I'm talking to you on every other week. I never have to leave my house to go see them. And it only costs me $10 every time. So that's why these diagnoses are growing. Nothing there's no hidden agenda. Scientists and doctors are not trying to manipulate anything. It's just growth in science and in medicine. Dyslexia is a language-based learning disability that affects between 2 and 5 out of every 45 adults, some more severe than others. And it's a cluster of symptoms that specifically relate to language. And contrary to popular belief, it's not simply reversing letters or words or stuff like that. You may mix up, a person with dyslexia may mix up letters in their words, which is what a lot of people think of when they hear dyslexia. But it's not the only trait of dyslexia. Sometimes folks with dyslexia have a tendency to blend words together. They can miss spaces. I put a CFS example here. White female is all one word instead of white female. They may have difficulty remembering the things that they have read. It is language-based and has absolutely nothing to do with numbers and math. That's a different diagnosis. Folks with dyslexia tend to have really terrible handwriting. My father was dyslexic. I could never read his handwriting. I couldn't forge his signature to save my life growing up because it was just absolutely terrible. And they often have limited vocabulary. Dyscalculia affects roughly 3 out of every 45 adults, and this is essentially what a lot of people will refer to as number or math-related dyslexia. However, it is not dyslexia based in any way, shape, or form. It's just a consistent failure to achieve in math commensurate with your age, intelligence, adequate instruction, and effort. Folks with this have a tendency, and I'm saying this because it's really difficult for me to say, but they have difficulty retrieving learned facts and procedures as related to numbers and math concepts. They often have difficulty with the perception of time, and they may misrepresent or have difficulty representing numbers as words or vice versa. So they may never be able to say 5 is the number 5 or the number 5 is the word 5. And that's essentially what folks identify as math and number dyslexia, but it is not. Moving on. Dyspraxia is a condition related to motor and coordination skills. Affects roughly 4 out of every 45 adults. And it causes people to appear more clumsy and have an ability to perform physical tasks less well than they may have expected to perform them. Then we move into Tourette syndrome, which is over dramatized in Hollywood and on TV. It's a condition that affects 1% of the population, or roughly 0 to 1 out of every 45 adults. And I chose the examples of 45 adults because on average, a lot of ECCs are going to be in that area. Some of the bigger ones, obviously, the condensed ones, the ones that are merged or whatever, they may be bigger than that. Many of them are smaller, but 45 is a good number. So in order for you to be able to put some perspective on your particular ECC, that's why I chose that number. So 0 to 1 out of every 45 adults. Folks with Tourette syndrome have sudden, involuntary, and repetitive movements or sounds. Those are scientifically called tics. They cannot be stopped. And they vary in their type, frequency, and their severity. Tics can be simple, just rapid eye blinking, head jerking, shoulder shrugging, eyes darting back and forth, nose twitching, mouth movements, grunting, coughing, throat clearing, barking. Or they can be complex and involve multiple muscle groups, touching and smelling things multiple times, stepping in certain ways, things that to the uncommon, untrained, undiagnosed eye may appear as obsessive compulsive, could be a form of Tourette syndrome. Again, they vary in frequency and severity, the tics. They will be worse if a person is stressed, which obviously in our line of work, could cause somebody with Tourette's to have their tics be amplified. They can occur while they're sleeping, and they do change over time. Usually they are expressed when a person's extremely uncomfortable. And the tic actually brings them the relief they need to get comfortable in whatever situation they're in. Other diagnoses, like I said, folks with bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, OCD, they may identify as neurodiverse. And again, so that list was not exhaustive. Those are the most common neurodivergent diagnoses in adults, but there are so many others. And creating an inclusive environment in your ECC is doing whatever you can to accommodate all the brains in your center. All right, so let's talk a little bit, now that we know about a few of the diagnoses, let's talk a little bit about neurodiverse folks' impact on your ECC. And I highlight here strengthening team dynamics through inclusion. Listen, DEI is not a bad word. Inclusion and diversity are not bad things. And you can have the most incredible ECC if you look at strengthening your team by including everybody. So I call it, and I made this, by the way. I did not take this from anybody else. So if you want to use this, feel free, email me. I'll give you my email at the end. But I call it the positive impact cycle. I believe every neurodivergent person in your life can positively impact you. And most of us do it in a real cyclic way. All right. The first part of that cycle is enhancing problem solving. All right, diverse teams bring varied perspectives, which will lead to innovative solutions and improve our response strategies within our agency and our ECCs. All right, so that's step one. And again, this is a cycle, all right, and hopefully it all makes sense once all four of them are up. Step two in the cycle is it increases understanding. Inclusive environments, they make trustworthy environments, all right? And they're built on trust and understanding and empathy. And that's all critical for managing the high stress environments we work in and managing high stress situations effectively within our centers. And it improves communication. Embracing neurodiversity ensures that our communication styles, our agency protocols, they can be adapted. And it makes things clear. It reduces redundancies as well as misunderstandings. And finally, it boosts resilience and morale, which I think is the most important thing in our industry today, is having a resilient emergency communications force that is high in morale. All right, I will lurk in the Facebook groups, but by and large, I stay away from them because the toxicity that I hear about so much, and that anybody hears about so much, that is happening in ECCs across this country, it's bewildering to me. And it is no wonder why we are in a perpetual staffing crisis. All right. So when you embrace inclusivity, particularly when it comes to embracing your neurodivergent partners, you create equitable practices and a diverse and inclusive culture that contributes to and supports the environment where everyone feels valued, which then will reduce turnover and it creates a more cohesive team. And then the cycle starts back over. Inclusive team is and a cohesive team is much better at solving problems and much better at understanding our constituents, much better at improving communication. And then it goes into boosting more morale. All right. So it's a cycle. Bottom line, an inclusive and equitable ECC is better equipped to serve all of the diverse communities that every ECC in North America serves. All right. Our communities are not one type of brain. All right. One type of person. Okay. Our communities are diverse. So when we create diverse ECCs that are inclusive and equitable, we're better equipped to serve our constituents. Some common traits in those who are neurodivergent. And again, there's not a whole lot common about neurodiverse folks, but these are traits that you may recognize in some of your partners. And what I've done here is I've listed some potential, and again, this is all potential because nothing is going to be the same for each person, okay? But some potential positive impacts, some potential negative impacts. A very common trait amongst all neurodiverse diagnoses is a high attention to detail. Positively, this can create extremely accurate calls for service in our ECCs, allowing our responders to have all of the information they need to appropriately respond to a constituent's need. However, a negative impact on that same token is a lot of us who are neurodivergent, we struggle with brevity, and we let info overload get in the way. My officers will tell you that brevity is not my thing. Some of them like me for it. Many of them who have been around for a long time do not. I try and I work hard at trying, but it is not the best thing. It's not my best quality, not my best trait. Hyper focus. Most neurodivergent folks know what is happening at all times around them. All right. You give a ND person an assignment, and they're going to know everything there possibly is to know about that assignment before they're done with it. I like to tell people when people sit down and shadow me when I am under the headset, when I have a radio group, and they've come from another one of my partners, they'll come over to my station and they'll be like, "Good Lord, man, you have like 100 windows open on your screen right now." And I tell them, when I have the radio, I know what is happening in my city at all times. If any other agency is going to come in my city, I'm going to know about it. Everything that is going on when I have a radio group, I know about. And that requires me to have all of those screens. The issue with that is sometimes that hyper focus on one thing may cause a neurodivergent person to miss a cue to task switch. I will tell you right here, right now, and I will scream it from the mountaintop, there is no such thing as multitasking. As a CTO, that is one thing that I have always told everyone I've trained. If you are beating yourself up because of an inability to multitask, stop. Because the human brain is not capable of it. It's been proven multiple times. Now, we can task switch like nobody's business, especially in dispatch, but we cannot multitask. Your brain cannot do more than one thing at one time. And those of us who are neurodivergent, sometimes our ability to task switch is greatly limited. Neurodivergent folks tend to be extremely sensitive to sensory inputs. We are very great listeners. So great, in fact, that constant chatter in ECCs may become a distraction. We have very unique communication styles. All right. And so positively, that promotes diversity within our ECCs and our communities. Negatively, we tend to be looked at as assholes. We are very straightforward. Many of us, we are extremely literal. And 99% of the time, everybody misunderstands every single thing that comes out of our mouth. I just had this conversation not too long ago with one of my supervisors. I have never had a boss who has never said to me that I don't think I know more than them. Every boss I've ever had has always thought that I think I know more than them. And that's not the case. I don't. It's just how I come off. Because I will answer a question I know the answer to. I will say what I need to say when I need to say it. And unfortunately, particularly in a paramilitaristic environment like emergency communications, that often gets us in a lot of trouble. As far as empathy and emotional sensitivity, it varies. It tends to be pretty high, which allows neurodivergent folks to be able to relate to callers, to soothe them, to calm them. Listen, I mask every day when I step out the door of my house. And I am whoever I need to be to every single person that answers that phone. But when the phone gets hung up, I move on. And that's a struggle for a lot of my coworkers, my partners. And it may be a struggle for some of you sitting here watching me right now. Oh, you're fake. You can call me that. I'm just really good at responding to people the way I need to respond to them. I've spent my whole life changing what I need to be for the situation that I'm in. Personally, I believe it makes me an incredible call taker and dispatcher because I can easily be who my sergeant or my lieutenant or my caller needs me to be in that moment. The downside of that is we get extremely emotionally exhausted very fast. So that's a problem. Neurodivergent folks are quick to recognize patterns. We have great situational awareness. We can catch trends very fast. If you are one of those lucky ECCs who is also your folks are now becoming real-time crime people at the same time, I would encourage you to assign some of those real-time crime monitoring and trends and whatnot to your neurodiverse folks, because I'm telling you, they're going to identify things oftentimes faster than our law enforcement partners on the street, our detectives. All right. Because sometimes we just need to look at things and be like, well, wait a minute, that's a trend. And then we dig and dig and dig until we identify that it is, in fact, a trend. The problem with that is we get super excited when we find those things, which tend to cause us to, again, struggle when it comes to task switching. We're very direct, going back to communication, which lends itself to extremely clear communication. My wife, my kids, they know what I need from them at every minute of the day, my partners. Unfortunately, most of humanity struggles with what they view as a neurodivergent person being rude, nasty, blunt, and, I have people tell me on a regular basis, sometimes the things you say are rude. It's not that I'm purposefully rude. It's just my communication style. A lot of us need routine and predictability. All right. Which means that in ECCs, we do extremely well with guidelines, but we may not do so well with mandatory overtime. I put out a call on PS Connect as I was putting this presentation together, getting the intricacy. If you emailed me, I have your email and I will reply to you, but I needed to focus on this. And one of the common trends from my neurodivergent partners across the country who took the time to respond is mandatory overtime really, really gets under their skin. In a world where we're in a perpetual staffing crisis, obviously that's problematic. None of them said they refuse to do mandatory overtime, but it bothers them. And so that is a potential negative impact when we talk about including and building inclusive ECCs. Neurodivergent folks tend to be very analytical, great problem solvers. We can deconstruct issues very quickly. However, we do have a tendency to struggle without clear guidelines. And that can be problematic in ECCs. And last two here, we have great memory. I can tell you exactly where I was 6 weeks ago at 6 p.m. And that's just who I am. That makes me a protocol and procedure master. I used to be our union rep. I had our city's contract memorized cover to cover. And that's just who I am. It's the same thing with most of our general orders. Although if you talk to some of my supervisors, they'll say, well, if you have your general orders so memorized, why do you occasionally bend them? But that's a conversation for another presentation. But that also causes us to overthink or hesitate when it comes time to adapting those procedures and those protocols. I know our protocols, but because I am who I am, I overthink them. All right. And I'm not talking EMD. And for my EMD folks out there, EFD, EPD, listen, I have nothing but the utmost respect for the international academies. I'm not telling you to bypass any of the, dispatch protocols. I am not an EPD or EMD dispatcher. We just don't subscribe to it or use it. And so, we have some room to interpret. And I love it, but I also hate it because it causes me to overthink and often hesitate when it comes to applying things evenly every single time. And we neurodivergent folks are compartmentalization masters, all right? I can talk to somebody who just committed suicide or attempted to commit suicide on the phone with me and hang up and immediately move into, and no offense to any Karen person named Karen in here, but immediately move into a Karen calling in because her neighbor is blaring their stereo too loud, and give them both the respect and dignity that they deserve from calling an emergency communication center. I can compartmentalize like nobody's business, which allows me to handle those rough situations with very little emotional burnout. But if you look at my negative column, we handle those rough calls with very little emotional burnout. Okay. And the reason I put the same thing in both columns was deliberate. It wasn't an accident. Compartmentalization in and of itself is not necessarily bad, but I have learned, thankfully, through hours and hours of therapy, that in my role, compartmentalizing what happens is not a bad thing. I must have a way to decompartmentalize when it's all said and done. And for me, I play Fortnite like nobody's freaking business. I come home. That's almost one of the very first things I do after I kiss my wife is I turn on my Xbox and start playing Fortnite. And that just allows me to open up all of those compartments and let all that crap out. But not everybody has a way and a method. And for a lot of neurodivergent folks, that has a tendency to really negatively impact them. All right, let's talk about impact on some of the key groups we serve in our ECCs. First, our constituents. Neurodiverse people can be very empathetic and detail-oriented, which obviously enhances the community's trust in your center. All right. However, their straightforwardness may result in a lot of misunderstandings with constituents. Trust me, citizens misunderstand me all the time. When it comes to our partners, we benefit from the diversity of unique perspectives, but we do find it difficult to adapt to different communication styles, which again will result in misunderstandings. Leadership. They benefit from having some of the most innovative problem solvers on their staff who produce such high quality work. However, there may be a struggle to offer the appropriate support mechanisms to accommodate their needs, which will result in misunderstandings. And the neurodivergent person themselves. They're fulfilled in meaningful service work. Most people who are neurodivergent just want to help everybody. All right. They're really not entirely selfish. But that causes us to get overwhelmed if we don't have the appropriate support mechanisms, which will result in misunderstandings. So the biggest impact I want you to take away is if you don't talk to your people, if you don't hear your people, your partners, your direct reports, whatever the case may be, whatever position you're in, if you do not listen and take the time to build a inclusive environment where they can communicate clearly with you, there will be misunderstandings. All right, we're going to wrap it up talking about creating an inclusive environment. How do we build that resiliency and maintain bridges? All right, these are strategies for everyone on the team, whether they are neurodivergent or not. Okay. We're going to talk about environmental. Let's look at our headsets. All right. There's so many different headsets out there. Let's make sure our people have the headsets that work best for them. Lighting in our centers. One great thing we did several years ago in our center, we have programmable LED lights throughout the entire center. And each squad has their page, their program in the screen that they like to use. And, sometimes we agree really well, sometimes we don't. So we'll look at environmental things like lighting, console adjustments, make sure, they can get comfortable, be themselves. I sit in the same exact seat and the same exact desk every single shift. Everyone I work with knows that that's where I like to sit. And they know that I take a good 45 minutes in the morning while I'm logged in and ready to take calls, getting it all set up and ready to go because I'm there for 12 hours. And look at ergonomics, all right, for everybody. Clear and accessible communication. We need to make sure that our SOPs, our procedures, our protocols are detailed and updated regularly. All right, when I was doing research for this and looking up SOPs in comm centers, the number of SOPs I saw that said last updated January of 2002, or one of them I saw wasn't updated since 1987. There's no way that that still applies today. We are in 2024. We need to look at our SOPs, our protocols, our procedures, make sure they're clear, make sure they're updated. Let's include some visuals in there, all right? Some people are visual learners. whether they're neurodivergent or not. Let's start looking at ways to make sure that all of our communication is accessible. Predictability. Listen, we need to provide consistent schedules as realistically as possible. It's almost impossible in most comm centers. I know it. I'm not naive. I'm very involved in APCO, Nina. I get it. I know what's out there, but we need to do our best, not just for our neurodivergent folks, but for everybody. All right, we're building resilience here in our ECCs. Let's segment tasks. Let's give people tasks that appropriately match their skill sets. You know, if you're a supervisor or manager, you know who your A+ bomb call takers are, and you know who every single one of your firefighters, EMS, or cops love to hear on the radio. You know that. So let's build to those strengths. And then we got to work on wellness in this industry. We really do. Like, it's bad. We need to make sure that everybody has a place they can go that is a designated quiet area. Our job is loud. Sometimes we just need quiet. All right. I'm very grateful my admin has given us all the areas that we need to decompress and get quiet, and I love it. And we need to make sure that our people understand any EAPs that are available, any department or agency programs that are available to them to promote mental health and physical well-being. And we got to build these bridges, folks. All right, when it comes to training, we need to use simulations. We need to make sure they're scenario-based. We need to effectively build upon previous training. All right. So much training in our industry is segmented. Things need to, I was so grateful when I saw that Juliet was presenting before me, because she's talking about the keynote was be yourself. And now I'm talking about, all right, neurodivergent people, it's time to be yourself. Like, we need to build upon our previous training and not segment it so much. We need to utilize, again, people for their strengths. Roles and responsibilities in our ECCs should maximize team efficiency and collaboration. Like I said, for you ECCs that are doing real-time crimes tracking, you've got some analytical people on your team. Use them. All right. If Brenda doesn't like watching the cameras for people stealing from the boardwalk, Brenda shouldn't probably be assigned to that job for the day. But if Dylan likes it, put Dylan on it. All right. We got to work to people's strengths. And that will make your team more cohesive, which again makes them resilient, reduces turnover. Provide productive feedback. Give feedback in a manner that avoids miscommunication. Be direct. All right. Sometimes feedback needs to be written. All right. When you tell me something, I will hear you. I will listen. But my ability to retain it is limited often. All right. If it's something you really want me to know, you got to send it to me in an email, a text, or something to that effect. And it needs to be concise, clear, and direct. I am not somebody who enjoys sugarcoating. Most of the time, I can't understand it. If you are asking me to do something and you sugarcoat it, I'm going to have no clue what you're talking about. So be direct. Check in regularly. Give mentors, assign mentors. Keep communication lines open if you're management. My admin has literal open door policies. Their doors are never closed, and I love it. And I am so appreciative for it. Keep your doors open, keep your lines of communication open. That fosters trust, it encourages growth. All right. Utilize your team approach. All right. We are a team. We are partners. You hear me? I say all the time, partners. I hate the word colleague when I make a call out, and I never say colleague. I always say my partner. We are partners in this. All right. That's just the way it is. So use it. Identify your ND staff as legally as you can, and make sure that everybody has a voice. Provide ongoing professional development. Let's include some soft skills, emotional intelligence and stress management and diversity awareness type training. All right. Adam and Chris over at the Healthy Dispatcher, some of their training is so incredible, not some of it, all of it, but it isn't focused necessarily on, well, this is how you type in this type of thing. It is holistic. And that's what all training should be, because we need to have professional development that includes everyone. Make your environments transparent. Insist on it. All right. Transparency leads to comfort. It reduces judgment. It promotes active listening, and everyone feels valued and understood in transparent environments. Lead by example, leaders. Your leaders, your partners, your coworkers, they all need to be trained to foster inclusive behaviors so that everyone feels included, and celebrate regularly. All right. We need to have more recognition programs in ECCs. We need more employee of the month, employee of the quarter, employee of the year, dispatcher of the year programs in ECCs. There are not nearly enough. We need to recognize each other's contributions in this industry, showcase our diverse talents. That way, everyone feels like they are a positive contributor to the industry and to the team. Inclusive practices benefit neurodivergent team members and build resilience for them, but also the entire team. Job satisfaction increases, stress is decreased, performance improves. Your ECC is empowered to serve its community more efficiently and respond to emergencies with greater efficiency in an inclusive and diverse environment. All right, real quick, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about it, and this is where things and people are going to get a little uncomfortable. We're talking about recruitment and retention. What are the HR implications? Of course, I'm not an HR person, but our practices need to comply with ADA policies, make sure that reasonable accommodations are provided for new dispatchers and telecommunicators through the entire process of hiring. We're going to talk about psych and personality evaluations. I wish I had more time to dive into my true feelings on this. I am grateful to have worked for an agency that does not have a psychological evaluation, because honestly, I wouldn't be here talking to you today if that were the case. I wouldn't be in 911 because I'm scared to death of psychological evaluations. I'm scared of what they're going to tell the person on the other end, and that person is just going to go off of what that evaluation tells them instead of getting to know who I am. Because I'm more than capable of doing this work. I was a teacher in a classroom for 10 years. I'm highly educated, and I'm damn good at my job as a dispatcher. But a psychological evaluation is not going to say any of that. So we really need to start thinking about this. If we want to address our staffing crisis in this industry, it's time to start looking at some of these practices that have been around since the dawn of time and consider doing away with them so that we are not losing out on quality candidates. A lot of those tools, they're not modifiable. They don't tell the whole picture, the whole story. And we are not going to fix the staffing crisis in this country in 911 until we identify that. Neurodivergent folks are capable of filling chairs in consoles. All right. We just have to look at our practices and the way we've been doing things. 37,000 vacancies nationwide, 1 in 45 adults usually having some type of neurodivergence diagnosis, who I guarantee you are scared of a psych evaluation. They're not applying to your ECCs because of it. You're losing out on quality candidates, I'm here to tell you. So back to my why. When we embrace inclusivity, we increase resilience and morale for everyone. It lowers the toxicity in our ECCs. An inclusive ECC is better suited to serve diverse communities, and positively, we're going to impact the 911 staffing crisis. I really appreciate you taking the time. I see a bunch of people chatted. I will read it later and reach out to you. If there's any other questions I can answer right away, right now, please ask them right now. But this is all my contact information. Take a screenshot, add me on LinkedIn. If it's a professional related email and you're okay with public record, send it to my work email. If you don't want it on public record, I'm in Florida. Everything is public record. You can send it to my personal email. You can text me. I got the Will line, 727-753-WILL. You can't forget it. Text me there. I'm happy to answer. If you're coming to standards and best practices in Clearwater Beach, reach out to me. I'll be happy to meet with you and talk more about this. I'm super passionate about it. We've got to change, folks. We are missing the mark when it comes to filling these seats because people like me are traditionally scared to apply for our jobs. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate every one of you. Are you back?
Very well done, my
Yeah.
friend. Very well done. You said this was the first time you were giving this presentation?
Yeah, this is the first time I'm giving this presentation. It's the first time I've presented in 911. I intend to hit the conference trail. I've got some more ideas related to this field. I used to present all the time at teacher conferences, but teachers are a different breed. 911 is a different breed. So I appreciate all the feedback I've got. I'm going to read it here when I'm done. And but yeah, first time.
Damn. Well done, bro. Like
Thank you.
that was yes. So everyone is saying, dude, well done. Do more presenting, Will. And yeah, I would have you said that to me when we were in the green room, and as soon as you started, I'm just sitting here like that can't be.
Well,
Like
I did go to
there's
Bible college, so I've got a little bit of preacher in me too. So
hey, well, there you go. That's there you go. That's where it's coming from. Either way, man, this was excellent. There was so much information. I was
yeah.
taking screenshots over here off
Yeah,
of
I
my
mean, and if
monitor.
anybody wants to, please email me. I'm happy to send you this presentation. I really think, we, like I said, we're missing the mark. We're missing quality candidates. There are more people out there like me, like Sheldon Cooper, who could very easily put on a headset and do what we do and serve our communities with grace and dignity and just be rock stars.
Awesome. Well, people make sure to reach out to Will. And I love that the Will line. Who put that in there? Roxy, I think maybe said that, or somebody said that. It was like the Will line. I was like, I
Yeah,
dig that. That is awesome. Also, um, again, this is why we also have the free community as well. So jump in there and Will, if you can add some of that stuff into the attendee feed,
will do.
and
Yeah, for sure.
especially if it's a screenshot of like this, which you have up here right now with all of your information to be able to get a hold of you. But folks, if you are on the community, you can go in there and you guys can like DM each other. You can, everything is in there as an actual community for people to be able to reach out and talk. And this again, there was just so much information. I really enjoyed this myself because there are folks that we've had roundtables about it where folks with ADHD, some of them, some folks they don't say, or other people don't know, and there are some things where there are these folks that are just, as you mentioned, are kind of afraid to even say because nobody wants anyone to look at them differently. There's nothing
Yeah,
wrong. It's I do something different and we can figure this stuff out together. But all it takes is that communication, that bridging the gap and learning from each other. And that's why sessions like this are important. And I will echo what Samantha said down there. We need exactly this session at conferences in 2025. Boom. There you go. And I hope you do come back in here, check out
I
all
will.
those comments. There's
Yes.
some excellent
Thank you,
stuff
everybody.
there.
Appreciate you.
And thank you. This was
Thank you.
excellent. Folks, we will be heading to the next session. Starts at about a quarter after 1. And thank you again, my friend. We'll see you all in the next one.